makes me happy, and I feel like it's correct. Awesome. Okay, now we're going to go into something else. I have a theory, and I'm going to read this one because I had to write it down. I have a theory that gender dysmorphia is similar to body dysmorphia in that it only exists because we have something to compare ourselves to. And that young kids wouldn't naturally be comparing themselves to anybody else unless someone called them to do it. And that, you know, by transitioning every little boy who wears a dress into a woman, we're actually killing off what might be the future gay population. Did that make sense to you?
That's a bunch of questions. I mean,
yeah, so there was multiple things in there. I can unpack that.
Well, the
Gender
first thing
dysmorphia with body dysmorphia. Do you feel it might be similar?
I would say that would have been the psychiatric consensus before the recent rise in political correctness.
Cool. I thought I just came up with it. So I like hearing that professionals thought it. Okay. And then do you believe that if kids never heard of it, they wouldn't be doing it?
Oh, there's all sorts of examples of psychiatric contagions. So if you read, there's a book called Discovery of the Unconscious, which is a great book. It's a great book. And anybody who's interested in psychoanalytic thought, it's also an extremely interesting book. He documents the rise and the contagious rise and then fall of multiple personality disorder over about 300 years. It cycles. And so what happens is there's a case report. It gets a tremendous amount of attention. Then there's all sorts of case reports. It just emerges and distributes itself everywhere. And there's hundreds of case reports. And then cynicism about it or criticism of it and skepticism starts to set in. And then the cases disappear and then the idea vanishes and then it reemerges. And that happens over and over. And there are personality types, histrionic is the technical term, who seem particularly susceptible to psychiatric contagion. Now, I don't know if that's the case with what's happening right now, but another example of that is that generally speaking, and I hope I'm still correct in this, if you put a suicide hotline in a town and you start to publicize suicide, the rates go up, not down. The same thing happened with cutting, which is extremely widespread. Yeah, that's a contagion. Yeah, it happened with eating disorders. So imagine that people have intense emotional troubles of a non-differentiated sort. That's common no matter what the historical time and place is, let's say. The way that manifests itself is going to be shaped by the current culture and the cultural narrative from culture to culture and within cultures itself. And so there's always this interplay with psychiatric diagnostic categories between the biology and the biological, let's say, pathology that might be associated with an illness and the way that's expressed. The culture shifts and turns that. And there's no doubt that psychiatric ideas can be contagious. And I do believe that that's one of the dangers in disturbing settled ideas of gender. Mm-hmm. Is that
I smile when I'm already agreeing with you, and these are thoughts that I have had, but you're expressing them better than I knew how. So that's why I'm smiling like a crazy at you right now. I'm like, yes.
It's clearly the case that some people suffer unduly from a cut and dried gender binary. Mm-hmm. Because there are many people who don't fit neatly into those categories. And it is partly because there's a biological sex, mm-hmm. and then there are personality traits, let's say, that are associated with gender, but not tightly linked to it. So on average, women are more agreeable, but some women are more disagreeable than some men. On average, women are more enthusiastic, but some men are more enthusiastic than some women. And so you can have a man who's enthusiastic and agreeable. So he's got some feminine traits. Mm-hmm. And the binary distinction is harder on people is hard on some people. Fine, fair enough, true enough. The question is, what happens when you blur the binary? And my suspicion is that you confuse and hurt far more people by destabilizing that than you help.
I agree. That's been my observation. I like to stand back, look at what's happening before I form an opinion as much as I possibly can without, getting emotional with the internet. And that's what I've seen happening. So I'd like to go to the next part of that question was, I grew up in dancing and cheerleading. And lots of little boys would love to put on the dresses and they would run around with the fairy wings. And 100% of those boys have grown up to be gay. And
probably not 100%.
Of the ones I saw in the dancing, the ones that I called it that they were gay. Okay. Those ones are gay. And my mom would be like, don't say that about them. Well, they're all gay now. And openly gay, happily married, whatever. Now, my thought is that if every little boy who's putting on a dress and dancing around and kind of, having those same mannerisms, we're now encouraging them to transition to a woman. Is that killing off our future gay population, for a lack of better words to use? That
discussion is being had in the LGBT community. Definitely.
Did they come up with anything?
The discussion continues. It's not an easy discussion to have, because just having it makes you hated no matter which side you come down on. And so it's very difficult to have a discussion when no matter what you conclude, you're going to be hated.
Yeah, that seems to happen to both of us a lot.
I think in some sense that conclusion is virtually inescapable if the pre-politically correct data on children with gender dysphoria is true, because the pre-politically correct data, there was a scientist in Toronto who was pilloried for supporting this data, but it was the psychiatric state of the art at the time. And I don't think it's been superseded by any new knowledge that's more valid. It was 85%, I believe, of children with gender dysphoria accept the biological reality of their body by the time they're 18. And so if you accept the Hippocratic Oath, which is in some sense, first do no harm. Sorry, that might not be the Hippocratic Oath. I can't remember exactly at the moment, but it's a medical, it's one of the hallmarks by which medical intervention might be justified. First, do no harm. The appropriate advice for a parent who has a child with gender dysphoria is wait. Don't do anything radical when the cost of doing something radical is so high. Wait. Now, the pro-transition opposition to that idea would say, well, it's so damaging if you wait that you're actually hurting the child more than you would if you went ahead with the radical transition. But I don't think
they have the data to back
on
that
yourself.
yet?
What's that?
Yeah, I don't believe they have the data to back that up yet, to say that it's going to be so wildly harmful, because we haven't had the test groups to even conclude that is going to happen in the future, because this is still a newer issue-ish. Does that make sense to you? That's how I stand back and look at it, is we don't have the data yet, guys, so we shouldn't be making big, giant decisions when we just don't have the data yet. And this is a lot of kids. There's a lot of kids that are transitioning now. So it's an interesting
well, and it's not a trivial matter, the transition. Now, if you can argue that it's not a trivial matter to not transition if that's your destiny and not to do it early. But I don't think, the data suggested that 85% of children with gender dysphoria accepted their biological reality by the time they were 18. So, but a substantial proportion of them did end. This is the answer to your question. A substantial proportion of them did end up gay. And so, yes, if you're transitioning, the more transitioning children medically, if all of the rest of that is true, then those are children who would have been gay who have now transitioned. Yes, that is. If those other propositions are true, that is what's happening.
We're in trouble already. I can feel it for having this discussion. that happens. It just keeps happening. Do you think I'm often in trouble for having discussions like this too? But do you think you and I maybe are missing something that we should have, where we should care that people are upset with us for having these conversations?
Well, I do care, and it's very difficult for me generally to have these conversations, because I do understand the anguish, let's say, that these issues produce. And I understand why people are motivated to take the positions they take. But there's catastrophe on both sides. And so I weigh the catastrophes and try to pick the route that's less catastrophic. When I don't think that the current theories of identity that are part and parcel of the culture wars are adequate theories of identity. I think they will do the people that adopt them harm. Now they think, well, I'm that person and I don't think it's harming me. And who are you to say? And the answer is, well, I'm a clinical psychologist and I've looked at the literature and I've watched this for a long time. And that's my professional judgment. It's like, I could be wrong, and your argument is, well, you have your experience and fair enough, it's your life, but I don't see that it's a good move. I certainly don't believe that the theory of identity that is coherent or adequate. It's neither. It's incoherent and inadequate. And your identity isn't merely what you feel about your sexuality, say, or even your biological identity.
It's silly. It feels silly. I feel like we've gotten to the point where a lot of the arguments are just silly. And the same thing, I feel for the people who these subjects affect, and they affect their families deeply, and everyone's, I get that these are big subjects, but I feel like if we can't have honest conversations where ideas are explored without chopping down everybody who might have an idea, we're going to get stuck, and then there's no innovation anymore. We have to be able to have these ideas, and you've been so brave with your ideas. I just want to say thank you for that, first of all.